Welcome, everyone. I'm Anastasia Khoo, the Chief Marketing Officer at Conservation International, and I'm so happy to be here today, again with Roger Fishman and this week's Artist for Nature featured musician, Peter Himmelman. Thank you both so much for joining. We're really thrilled to have you, and thank you for participating in this fantastic Earth Month, as we call it, and lending your voices and talent to this effort. So Roger, if I can start with you, you brought Peter and Conservation International together for this project. Tell me, like, how did you connect? How did you two meet? How do you know each other?
Well, actually, it's a long story, which I'll make super short. Peter, I may not know this, but I've actually known Peter for 40 years. 40 years. Now, actually, I only recently met him like 3 months ago, but 1991, he released the most powerful music of an album called From Strength to Strength. And I actually saw him in downtown Manhattan. And his lyrics, his music, his voice, I realized, truthfully, he was like both a prophet and a poet. And he's both timely and timeless because he goes inside your soul and he sort of stirs you and brings you to your truest self. So I actually really fell in love with that album and what it did and touched me back then. And so when we had the opportunity to collaborate again, obviously between Conservation International and myself, I thought, who would be amazing to join? That would, again, be timely and timeless in light of what's going on in the world. And so I reached out to Peter, and he was incredibly kind and generous to respond rapidly. And then we got a chance to talk, and it began the creative collaboration and friendship.
That is so lovely. Do you remember the club where this was? Do you remember the show?
I remember the show. I remember what it looked like. I actually went downtown with his music label at the time. And I remember just sitting there, like my eyes wide open, my jaw dropped, and just knowing that I was experiencing something truly, truly special. And like I said, because he goes inside of you, he moves you to feel and to think, and to also confront and engage. It's quite magical and powerful. So yeah, I remember that evening very, very well.
That is truly the power of music, and certainly great musicians, the power that they can have on people. Peter, what did you think when you heard this from Roger out of the blue about this project, and why did you agree to participate?
Well, I think one of the things that makes people connective is the words they use and the rhythm of their language. And quite frankly, I think Roger sent me a Facebook note, which, he just sounded like a normal person, which is so rare these days. I mean, normal in the best sense. He just wrote a sensible letter. It was about nature. It was about, the environment, about beauty, trees. There's a person who doesn't seem like he's a, serial killer, at least by what he wrote to me. And I'm like, I got to get a hold of this guy. It was as simple as that. I was probably drinking tea in the morning and eating an egg or something. And I'm like, no, Roger Fishman, I'll give this guy a shout. And we became like really close friends since this experience, because there's a lot of commonality.
The reason we have commonality is neither one of us are serial killers. It's amazing.
Makes us
so
unique.
glad to hear that.
A very low standard to get over.
Glad. Well, we're very happy to have you both as part of this project, and obviously, a shared love and passion for nature. And Peter, you once spoke about the world as like a wondrous and mysterious place, and the importance of staying connected to that wonder. I want to ask you, like, in these, surreal and challenging times, are you staying connected to nature and the world and the miraculous, or how are you doing that?
Well, I grew up in Minneapolis in a suburb called St. Louis Park. made famous by the Coen brothers and Al Franken and everything. And, you know, it wasn't a rural place, but we were very near, like, we call it the woods or the weeds. At various times in our lives, we would do different things there. I would build forts there. I would make out with, you know, my girlfriend there, and I'd smoke pot there, illicit things. But always I was drawn back to this natural sylvan setting. And sometimes I would just hang out there for long periods of time. I remember I was on a little bit of a campaign against going to services on Yom Kippur. And I went into the woods and sort of sat. I didn't know that I was meditating per se, but, you know, sort of feeling the grandeur of this small wooded area. And we recently started spending a lot of time up in the Hudson Valley, my wife and I. And, you know, I sort of reconnected with this sense of being in nature constantly, looking up at the sky and seeing, you know, a formation of geese. It's a humbling experience. And I've often wondered, maybe somebody once did a study on this, why it is, and maybe I have this all wrong, but it seems like religious people, whether they're church-going people, or however you define them, seem to be in large part in rural areas. Now, I don't know if that's something you've ever thought about, and I'm not getting into the politics of it, but what I started to think about that, and what if in fact that were true, I don't know that there's any data to support this. There's no data to support, by the way, anything I ever say or feel. I am completely unsupported by scientific data. Everything I say is just coming to me somehow, and much of it is just a bunch of, you know, meandering. But this idea that you live in an environment that was not man-made is and back to your original idea, it is a wondrous and humbling experience to know that you are not the center of the world, and that the machinations of your imagination are not everything. There's a larger experience to be had. In that sense, it's both humbling, and it brings a person to a greater sense of wisdom, because in fact, we are not the center of the universe. We are a part, and an extremely valuable part of this larger system. So, you know, being in nature, being by a pond, watching these little bass come to the surface. I mean, I don't know what kind of education it gives me, but it surely grounds me, makes me feel better about my life.
I think that may be one of the, you know, silver linings of this entire past year is sort of this reconnection and renewed appreciation in our natural surroundings, and certainly the, you know, to your point, the grandeur that even a small woods can have. You know, Roger, I know you that certain grandeur and appreciation certainly comes across in your work. Could you tell us a little bit about, you know, the video that you set Peter's song to, and where that was shot and taken place, and your experience there? I'd love to hear about that.
Sure. You know, well, you know, Peter's music in this specific song really is, to me, an awakening. It's a story and a call to action for us to awaken ourselves, awaken our connection to nature, to our potential, and to do good for the universe. That's how I felt it. And so when we put together the video, and my colleague, you know, Melissa Shoemaker, did a phenomenal job. It was to try to bring his words to life through nature. And so a lot of it is filmed, you know, in Greenland. And part of it is because his story works so well with that. And part of it is because Greenland has that aspirational element, an inspirational element. So Greenland is a big, big focus. And of course, we have other countries from around the world because I filmed in Iceland and Namibia and Kenya. But like I said, as you listen to his songs and his words and you watch it, you'll see all that come together in a beautiful symmetry, a really wonderful harmony. And at first, and Peter and I discussed this, this is, you take these two worlds and you think, well, how will they work together? Because it's not the BBC. And I love the BBC. It is this natural art forms of nature and music, of humanity and the environment that literally sing together and bring our lives, I think, more connected, not only to each other as humans, but to the environment. And so that's a little bit of hopefully answering your question of how this came to be, where it was shot, and how we picked the places we picked. In fact, there's one part where Peter talks about sort of waking up, and I think he's got brand new legs and walking up, and you fly up this amazing, amazing part of Greenland's ice sheet. And there's this mountain, and there's a beautiful blue, almost like a melt below. And the melt is carved and shaped by the mountain above it. Because the wind will push the ice sheet down. The mountain literally acts as a carving mechanism. And as you go up it, what you don't see actually is on the tippy top of that mountain, I'm standing there flying the drone. And it only reinforces to me, again, to Peter's point as well, how small, significant, but small we are, and how humbling it can be. And that nature always gives you that context and reminder.
I think that's so true. I think your videos in particular sort of bring the beauty, but also the power and the expanse, right? Of these really wondrous places. Roger, I know, for both of you, Roger, you obviously have traveled, and I think that's a piece that you've mentioned before, sort of really inspires you. I'd love to hear from both of you, like, where are you feeling inspired? Like, what are you getting your inspiration from these days?
Peter?
Well, I mean, a lot of my inspiration, I guess, comes from sort of internal sources, relationships with people. But as I think about it, and did just a wee bit of thinking about my relationship to nature for this interview, actually, I prepped for days. I go back to my childhood, and I think of these seminal experiences where one of them was, I was very young. I used to fancy myself like a burgeoning good swimmer. And I was in the Red Sea. I was 8 years old, and I was with my brother, who was just a few years older than me. And we shouldn't have been swimming in the Red Sea by ourselves, but it was a different time. We were feral people, and my parents had much faith in whatever our abilities. But I remember so we sort of, just he and I, my brother and I, had a snorkel and a mask. I was 8 years old, and he was 12. So the water was probably about 3 feet deep, and you couldn't step on it because it was full of sea urchins. And it was really scary to me. I don't know what a sea urchin was, but it looked like a pincushion, like with an angry eye. It was just like something's bad here. And it was quite terrifying. So this is I'm explaining an indelible memory. This is just like it's embedded in my DNA now. And I had to swim as quickly as possible, this kind of rudimentary breaststroke, lest I lose, altitude, whatever you call it, in the water, and I get pricked by these angry sea urchins that were none too happy that I was there. And I'm like furiously going like this. It was terrifying. And it went on for a really long time, much longer than I planned. Maybe it was only 4 minutes, but it seemed like an hour. And then all of a sudden, there was an underwater cliff, and whoosh, I was flying this is the experience of flight. There's no question in my mind that this is exactly what it feels like. And I was over the cliff, out of danger, and I was startled. Made breathless by the beauty that I had seen. You know, scores of starfish moving, and parrotfish, and colors in coral. This is before this Red Sea area got pretty polluted, and now the coral is vastly outweighed by these barren areas. But in that time, in 1968, summer of 68, the coral areas way outweighed the barren areas, and it was just overwhelming. And I came back. You know, it's hard to describe. This is about the biggest description I've ever given of that moment. You know, well, how was it swimming, boys? My mom might have asked, or whatever. You know, like, yeah, it was pretty good. It was fine. Let's have some ice cream. But that is something that relates to peak experiences that I've had in my marriage, and in raising 4 children, and making music, and being on stage, and that is really high up there.
That was a beautiful, beautiful description. You really took us there. And what I can see how that made such an impression for you. Roger, what about you and your own inspiration? Like, where are you finding that?
You know, I find it sort of 2 ways on 2 levels. One is quite similar to Peter. On an overall level, I like to wander, and I like to wonder. So that allows me to gain, I believe, new wisdom and new experiences to feel, which allow me to create more and be inspired more. So I believe the core part of my life is wandering and wondering. And that can be through family and friends. It can be through social media, actually. And it can also be inside, as well as with nature. So to me, as a core part of my life, wandering and wondering is elemental and fundamental. It allows me to sort of feel the world actually more childlike, with less filters on. So I find it everywhere I go. It could be my wonderful dog who's sitting over here, who just sort of shares and teaches me something. I look outside in the morning. Peter and I were talking this morning, and you hear the birds or hear the owls, and it just sort of touches you, and then allows you to wander through their lives in your mind and heart, and wonder about their lives. And when you start to live, I believe, in a nonlinear way, where you're literally, it's almost like a bat, where you're just sensing and getting senses back. Everywhere you go is a way to be inspired. And then it's how we bring it together that allows us to be creative in a way that's truest to our own voice and our heart. So I would say the outside world, the inside world, but always wandering and wondering.
You know, if I might add to this, and because you inspired me to think about this sort of odd thing, as we mature, we gain more and more skills. And many times, if we're lucky, we're rewarded for our skills. And we are socialized to know things, to understand things, to have information and wisdom at the ready. And the problem with that is, and this is what makes what you just said made me think about this, is that there's something even more important about not knowing, a sense of uncertainty. Now, we don't get paid for that, so we don't generally get rewarded for that. And oftentimes, as a result of not being rewarded, we avoid it. But to put ourselves, let's say, you know, bringing back to the natural world, just simply to dive into the ocean, or to look out on some beautiful vista or some arid plain, you are then cast in again to this idea of being not physically small, but you can't know here. You can't be certain. And the reason why that's beautiful is because it's closer to an elemental truth. And I think that's maybe, at least for me, one of the best parts of being in nature. You're cast into this very childlike, because children have at least access to a wonderful ignorance. As adults, we can't be ignorant, but we need to have a vehicle to grasp hold of our own ignorance or our own unknowing. It makes us better somehow.
And to that point, and I love what you just said, Peter, a lot of my art, and I think I've discussed this in the past with you, is, when I'm in a helicopter, I will shoot straight down. Even when I'm filming, I will film straight down. And the reason I do that is to eliminate knowing, eliminate familiarity, eliminate context. And what that does, and the goal is for us to feel first, right? Because you feel something when you don't know something. And then you go to the next stage. When you don't know something, you imagine, well, what might that be? I feel this. I'm uncertain. It's unclear. Now, what do I imagine it could be? Right. And then, well, if I feel something and I imagine something, what does this mean to me? And what that does is it allows you to go back to a childlike state of wandering and wondering and not knowing. And that is part of my intention with my art, is to let us connect back to our inner and truest selves and allow us to be free from having answers and allow us to embrace just feeling the universe.
I used to think about when I was a kid too, like when you're a kid, you're not really thinking about getting ahead. You know that you're gonna be fed usually. I mean, you can't. People, God forbid, don't know that, but generally, so you're not really worried about like making it,
right?
And you're not thinking in a facile way. Well, this is something I could use to do. You're just absorbing. And for me, at 61 years old, and maybe because it's my new forays into nature a bit more than I had usually been, and because of COVID, and by the way, you mentioned a silver lining. Here's another thing. I find that people are very hesitant to say what's really true in many cases, certainly not all, and we have to be very mindful of people who have been through truly tragic circumstances. But for many people, they're afraid to let this COVID thing go because there's something very beautiful about the way they've been experiencing life. And I know for one, I mean, my wife and I just, you kind of hesitantly speak about it because you know how many people have been so pained. But there's something that we've gained that we don't want to lose here. And hopefully we can create a little satchel to carry with us, some little totems to quickly remind us to snap back to this idea that people, that nature, that wonder, that the creator, those things are more essential than buying some new shiny thing to make us glad.
I could not agree more. I think that is our hope, that people take forward the wonder and the power and appreciation of nature coming out of these really challenging times, but the solace that it can bring us. And I certainly witnessed that in this, fantastic series, Peter, that we're so grateful you could participate in, and Roger for bringing us together. I also feel like you guys could have a consciousness podcast, and it would be really fantastic to listen to. I've so enjoyed listening to you both and your prophetic words. I wonder, as we close, is there anything else that you'd like to add or share or say?
Peter?
Well, I mean, maybe this is off-camera stuff, but what's really kind of wondrous is it seems like, well, he's just saying that anyway. But, I just answered a thing on Facebook. And here I find this guy, Roger. And I said to my wife, you know, like, it's not like I'm, hey, I got this new friend, tell me about him. She doesn't really care that much, but she cares very deeply that I found a new friend. But I'm trying to articulate what it's like to find a person with whom you have a language, you know, that you don't have to really start from scratch. And it just, there's so much in common. And that is a product, I think, of this changed year. I mean, God willing, it's only 1 year. Not, I should think, if it's a quarter century of this, not so good. But if it's just that 1 year, remember that year. And by the way, my wife and I took a 2-year journey. We moved to New York from Santa Monica just to have an adventure. So in the middle of adventure, we got COVID, we got a grandson, we were like terrified. We were gladdened by the blooms of spring. Like they were so meaningful in the park. We'd walk in Riverside Park in the dark, and they're back again, and vaccines are back. And it's just like, all right, I get it. Good trick.
That's lovely. Roger, any closing thoughts from you?
No, I would say I would echo what Peter said. I think there's a part of what he shared, and I really do deeply value our burgeoning friendship. It's wonderful. I think it's to keep an open heart and open mind, and to create your own flow, to create your own energy, and be open to possibilities. And I think the more that we do that with nature, with each other, and take our belief systems and actually live them, so that we do have a better future, for a future that we'll never live, but for a future others will. And that's our legacy. I think if we can just be open to feeling that, thinking that, and living intentionally, but really emotionally, I think to me is one of the strengths. And that allows us to create what we're doing right now, right? Which is, I didn't know Conservation International really until like a year ago, right? And then now also we have this really wonderful, meaningful relationship. I didn't know Peter, truthfully, up until 3 months ago. So I think it's constantly trying to create new energy, positive energy that could be for the betterment of our own souls, but for the betterment of all life, not just human life, and for the environment. Because obviously we need the environment when it needs us. So I just say be open and keep moving forward in that regard.
Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to share with us today. And certainly thank you for being part of this amazing, beautiful campaign, Artists for Nature. Thank you.